Okay, so now we're going to heat our water for our mash. We have 10 pounds of grain, and you want about 1¼ quarts of water per pound of grain. So we need 12½ quarts. This does not have to be exact, but it should be close. So we will get 12½ quarts of water put in here, and then we will be outside. So I've heated our 12½ quarts of water roughly to 170 degrees. What we want to really happen is we put our grain in the mash tun, and we want it to sit there at 152 for 60 minutes. I found with this mash tun that I have, if you go about 10 degrees over, so we're going to shoot for 162 degree water, and once the grain absorbs the water, it drops at about 10 degrees. So this is my mash tun. It's a got cooler. I took the valve out and put a bulkhead fitting and put this valve in it. And then this is a false bottom. So this sits down in here. I'm sure you can see this. And this tubing, piece of PVC pipe, goes into the fitting like that, and then our grain sits on top and makes a filter. This is the mash tun setup. We will pour the grain in there now. Before the next round of barking dogs, our water is 163 degrees. It's close enough in my book. Our valve's closed. We want to stir this up so there's no dry chunks in there. Okay, we stir this up to incorporate, get everything wet. We want to make sure we don't knock the tube off the bottom. See where we ended up. 153, so we'll be good with that. Stick the lid on here, and that should stay. Must have pulled out. So we're about where we want to be. So this will sit here for an hour now. So the mash has been in the mash tun for about an hour and 5 minutes. This is our lauter tun setup, which is an old cooler that's about half jacked up. I took the valve out of it and put a bulkhead fitting and made this little setup here, and I'll show you what that does in a minute. First of all, I've heated up. This is probably about 5 gallons of water to 170 degrees, and this is what we're going to lauter or rinse the wort with. You may have noticed I haven't sanitized anything yet. There's no real need to. Some people may disagree, but we're going to boil all this anyway, so there's not much of a point in it. So we've attached the tubing, put that tubing and put it to the bottom of our kettle, and we will slowly let it drain. You don't want to get a bunch of air in it right now. I guess bad things happen if you do that. So we will let that sit there and slowly drain, and then we will, when it's finished, we'll pour it back through and do it again. Alright, so now we will repeat that step. What we're doing here is just rinsing the grain, and the grain acts like a gigantic filter. So by doing this twice, we'll get all the small pieces back to the top, and we won't have a bunch of chunky stuff in our beer. So now we can go ahead and start rinsing with the water in the lauter tun. Probably tune's more correct. So what we want to do is slow down the rinsing, slow down what's going out, and we want to get this grain submerged so it's all underwater. And the idea of the little spray bar here is so you don't just with the water pressure bore a hole right through. You want to be able to get an even pressure across all the grain bed so it rinses evenly and you capture all the sugars. All right, now that we have it kind of full, we can slow it down, and you want to kind of balance how fast it's coming in and how fast it's going out. We don't want to do this too fast or we won't get the sugars out of it. So this should take about an hour right here. Okay, looks like we're about done lautering. This is a 6-gallon pot, so we want this thing pretty much that full, or a little more, because we're going to lose some to evaporation, etc. So next, when this stops and we get bubbles, we will go over and put it on the burner and start the boiling process. So here goes. This will take a little while to boil, so when it does, we'll bring it back closer to it. So meanwhile, while we're waiting for the boil to start, we need to start sanitizing. This stuff takes 1 ounce for 5 gallons. So we'll put 1 ounce in here. Start adding water. This stuff foams a lot, so it's going to take a while. And like anything else that's going to touch, go ahead and stick that in there too. All right, so it's about to get real right here. It's starting to boil, and that shit's going to foam over everywhere. That's what they call, I think, the hot break. Part of my process, we're going to stick this in here now also. This is what we're going to use later to cool it, but we're also going to use this to sanitize it. So our recipe calls for, at the beginning of the boil, we boil for an hour. At 60 minutes, they work backwards essentially. So now at the start, 60 minutes left, we'll add 1/2 ounce of Centennial hops. They come in of course, a 1 ounce package. So I just guesstimate a half. put out the flame. Never actually had that happen before. So now we will just let that sit there and gently boil. So we started at about 3:05, so I'll write that down. With 20 minutes to go in the boil, 1 ounce of Cascade. Ten minutes to go, another 1 ounce of Cascade. Okay, it's been an hour boiling. The recipe calls for 2 ounces of Citra hops at flame out, and then a 10-minute hop stand, which, from what I understand, you let it sit here for 10 minutes. I've kept track of everything by this, so we're at this point. 2 ounces of Citra at 0 minutes and sit here for 10 minutes, so at 4:15 we will start the cooling process. The copper coil in there is actually my heat exchanger. So now we're susceptible to bacteria, contamination, etc. So what we want to do now is rapidly cool this, which is what that coil is going to do. We have a rain barrel here. It's full of water. And a pump. So we are going to pump water out of the rain barrel through this copper coil back into the rain barrel and recirculate it to get our temperature down. If it eventually won't drop far enough, I'll add some fresh water, or I've actually thrown ice in there before. So here in about 8 minutes, we'll come back and start this process. Okay, we've done our 10-minute hop stand. Time to go with this and cool everything. Hope this pump works. Water's coming out, so it's working. This will take about 21 minutes. You want to get the wort temperature down, I want to say below 80 degrees. Otherwise, when you pitch the yeast, it'll kill it apparently. So let's cool for a while. Meanwhile, while we wait, we're down to about 110. So I think we're reaching diminishing returns with the rain barrel, so we're going to add some ice. You can also use your garden hose and just run straight up tap water through it. I just don't feel like wasting that much water. So we'll let that run for a few more minutes. Okay, we're down to about 85 degrees. You can shut this off. Get this out of the way. I have dumped out the sanitizer. Don't worry about that foam in there. Can you hold that? Now I need to dump this into this carboy without making a huge mess. And at this point in this brew's life, the wort's life, you want oxygen in it. So it's okay to splash it here. You don't want it on when you're doing the hot side where bad things happen. So we're gonna pour all this in here and it's gonna foam out the top here in a second. That's all right. There is a strainer for this funnel and you can strain all these hops out, but it clogs up so bad that it's about unusable. So we will just pour all that sludge in there. Deal with that later. All right, that's got the perfect amount. Now, we need to aerate this some more. So right now, right here, we have a fish tank stone. And we're going to take a fish tank air pump. And we're going to pump some air into this. Of course, it'll be nitrogen and oxygen and all that, but we want the oxygen for the yeast. So we'll let that run for a few minutes. So we've been aerating the wort for about, I don't know, 5-10 minutes. We'll pull that out of there. You may recognize this from yesterday. This is our yeast starter. It has been pretty active. We'll go ahead and pour that in. Okay, now we need to get that to a somewhat cool and dark place and let it start processing. Okay guys, so it's the next day. This is our fermenter. I have a fan in this towel that I've wetted and wet periodically to try to keep the temperature down. This is a blow-off tube. You can see it bubbling. So it is vigorously fermenting right now. It'll do that for a couple days. And then once it slows down, we'll take the tube out and fill this airlock to about halfway with sanitizer, and then that'll go in place. And then we'll let that ferment for about 2 weeks. So anyway, that's all we're doing for now. You want to keep this between 59 and 75 degrees. Ideally, the cooler the better. I started out with an ice pack in there, and I'll change that every couple days. Keep pouring water over it, and with the fan, it should work out all right. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in a couple weeks in another episode when we'll transfer this to another fermenter and add more hops.